Hey guys, my name is Jenna. Welcome back to my channel. This is Those Fentanyl Left Behind. If you want to come here and leave your story about a fentanyl overdose in the comments, I would really love to read it. I think part of the healing process, at least in my opinion, it really helps to hear that other people are going through the same thing that you are. And while I am going to be focusing on that and talking about that more, just because of this whole Maui thing going on, I really felt in my gut like this needs to be spoken about so much. We need to blast this story everywhere and point out all the anomalies and hold the officials there accountable. You have a police chief who came here from Vegas or came there from Vegas. That's a pretty big leap to move from Vegas to Hawaii. Not to mention that he beat out 4 other locals and was paid $50,000 extra to move there. Now, the government would not have had to do that had they hired one of the other 4 locals, but they still went out of their way to do that. Not only that, but he went from making $158,000 when he first moved there to within 50 days getting a raise to $208,000, which was $10,000 more than he even asked for. I mean, who asks for a raise within the first 50 days they work somewhere? Like, you have to prove yourself. Like, what could you have possibly done in 50 days? So, very shady. Then you have Terry Jones, the assistant, who died. She was in that department for, I believe, something like 30 years before Pelletier had even moved to the police chief position. And I have a feeling maybe she didn't want to go along with his administration because she ended up dead at 4:40 in the morning chasing a supposed purse snatcher, which sounds like BS to me. Sounds like a cover story, but that's just my humble opinion. Then you have this governor who is a doctor and finishes his residency there in Hawaii. And within 4 years, he's already elected to the Senate, beating out all the other locals that live there. There's something to be said about that. So I was going to talk about this interview that I heard on the 28th on hagmanpi.com with Paul Preston, but I think it is much more important for you guys to hear it for yourself. In case you don't know who Hagman Report is or Paul Preston, Hagman Report used to be on YouTube. I have been listening to them since 2010, I think, and long time. Still very weird for me to listen to it without Joe because I'm not that much older than he was, and that was so heartbreaking for his dad and his family and baby on the way, that he passed away. So yeah, I've been listening to them for a long time. And Paul Preston, so the Hagmans, or Doug Hagman, is a private investigator, 35-year experienced private investigator who worked with the FBI, he worked with the NYPD, he lives in Pennsylvania, he's worked with the Pennsylvania PD, state PD. He is a lot of really high up contacts. Then you have Paul Preston, who is from Agenda 21 News or radio, not really sure which one, but he actually lived a few miles from the Paradise, California fires, and he was boots on the ground for the whole thing. And I wrote a bunch of notes. I was going to talk about it and just discuss what he had talked about, but I really think it's so much more important for you guys to hear it for yourself. If you want to listen to the full interview, you can go to hagmanpi.com and it'll be posted there for you. It's from the 28th. But yeah, I'm just going to play the interview and hope it doesn't get flagged because, the Hagmans got removed, or Doug got removed right around, I think, when Alex Jones did. So this is vital information, super vital. Smart meters, chemtrails, direct energy weapons. This is all correlated. And this man has a degree in plants and biology. And he also has experts that he worked with not to mention friends because he lived in the area, the sheriffs that he knew, that he talked to, the morgue people that were going around trying to identify remains. And this is such vital information. And when you listen to it, you're really going to realize that Maui is no accident. None of these fires are any kind of accident. I don't think the Canada fires are an accident. I don't think any of the fires going on are an accident. Maybe one or two, but not all of them. You have other fires that are going on around in the rest of the world too that you don't hear about on our news because it is so censored. So here is Paul Preston from August 28th talking about the correlation between Maui and Paradise, California. And I really think it's going to blow your mind because it blew mine. So, just listen to it. And like I said, if you want to keep listening to it and I don't finish it, then go to the website and listen to the whole thing yourself because it's compelling. And I think once you listen to it, you really can't argue much after that. So here goes.
So there was absolutely no warning for any of these people to get out, and for a lot of them, the fire overcame them very quickly. A lot of them did get out on the roads. A lot of them were trapped on the roads, very similar to what you saw, almost identical to what you saw in the situation in Maui. And even as sun rose, the darkness descended because of the fire itself, the smoke, and the smoke was very, very black in color. Very similar to what you saw and almost identical to what you saw in Maui. But these people that were calling me, I said to them, well, if there's a fire, you need to get out and get out immediately. And of course, they all got out. Luckily, those people got out, but a lot.
So what he's talking about is that he has news affiliates in Maui. And that morning, they were calling him and sending him pictures and videos of these laser beams that were shooting down into their area or that they saw. So, where have we heard that before? He's not the only one, but let me let him finish what he was saying because there's really no denying it now. There's no denying it. It was not a natural wildfire.
People did not get out. And that was the biggest rub of all. When you take a look at the fire in Paradise, it was like a nuclear bomb went off. And I went up right after the show. I drove up over there, and it was pretty. You could see it was a huge conflagration that was going on. The black, acrid cloud had come over the whole Central Valley, heading west of all places. Usually the wind comes in from the west. This is now wind that's coming in from the east and blowing everything out to the Central Valley. And it was a blackened cloud, and you drive underneath the cloud because it actually sat up about 1,000 feet above the valley floor. And once you got in underneath it, it was dark. It was pitch dark. You could see it out in front of it on the road. You could see a line of light. But as far as being able to drive on the road correctly, you had to turn your lights on. And when you turn your lights on.
So listen to what he just said. He said there was a huge 1,000-foot high shelf cloud over the area that he actually drove under. And you can see when you're driving into it, but once you were in it, you couldn't see anything.
Matter. All particulate matter had been sort of evaporated, so light wasn't even refracting off the atmosphere.
What could do that?
It was very difficult to see, and so I made my way through at the end of that, and I thought, what the heck kind of fire is this? I'd never seen. I lived in the mountains for about 13 years. At about 7,000 feet. And I've been in a number of forest fires. I'd never seen anything like this before. And so when we finally got up, I had my press credentials. We went up on the Skyway, as it's called, and there's a Tuscan golf course up there on the right-hand side. And when I got up there, I noticed that there was a huge camp, and they kept on telling me as I was going up, There's go to the base camp. We'll meet you at the base camp. I had no idea what the base camp was. Now I live up here. I used to live in Magalia, which the house I lived in burned down, but used to. But I had no idea what they were referring to as a base camp. And so they stop us at the entrance to the Tuscan golf course. Well, the golf course had been taken over by a PG&E camp. It was a huge camp with buildings, trucks, lighted areas, everything. And I thought to myself, what in the world is this? And then I realized that you could see spools of electric cables, the things that go overhead. You could see the telephone poles. You could see all that equipment. You could see transformers. And I thought to myself, why do you have a base camp on this beautiful old golf course, which was completely taken over? And, I'm sitting here thinking, well, this just doesn't jive. So I ended up going up to seeing the fire scene in Paradise the day of the fires, watching the fire build and things like that. I came down at the end of the day, did some reporting outside the airport, the air attack base that Cal Fire has an air attack base there, and was listening to all the operations and stuff. And they weren't putting planes up. That was really kind of weird, except for some of the smaller planes. And then I started to think to myself as I'm going through this is really kind of a strange fire, because I would go to that base and other fires at Chico Airport and watch these planes take off. They'd refill with the fire retardant and take off and come back into the air operation. And
where were the fire retardant planes?
And so that was just the first clue. The other
they
clue
let
was
it burn for hours.
Well, we then went over to the Walmart in Chico, and the Walmart was actually starting to service now as a refugee camp for the victims. And so we went over there, and I was just doing the reporting part of it, and I soon realized that there's a disaster going on here, that you have a lot of people, kids in particular, that didn't have parents, and it was a disaster waiting to happen, but there was nothing for them. So the good people of Chico and other parts of the county got together and the churches started to get together, clothes and sheltering these people. This is at night now. It's getting very, very cold out. And so I put the call out to the New Californians, our group down in Butte County and the other surrounding counties as far as Sacramento, south of Sacramento. And we instantly mobilized and brought up a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of materials. We started to put the call out, for clothes and food and money. Some of our people met in their own businesses, donated tens of thousands of dollars for the cards, the credit cards that you could get to go get food and so on, which was very helpful. And we built a camp there and started putting out clothes and shelter and things that we could provide for them, tents if we could get them. And, you had thousands of people literally crammed in a dirt lot trying to survive. And I thought to myself, the state of California is not here. The state of California never showed up to help. They never showed up to help. Neither did FEMA. And finally, it was then the Red Cross showed up, but they were putting everybody off, and everybody was going over to get the stuff from the Red Crosses they said that they would help them with. And then they come back to us and say the Red Cross isn't doing anything. So it was really a disaster of a monumental proportion. But then we started going up the next day. I went up the second day to examine the burned out area. I actually wanted to check on some houses. I was asked to check on some properties that of some people, and they had all got burned down. But then I realized the magnitude of it. It was like a nuclear bomb had gone off, literally. And the temperatures were extremely high. And I could tell the way the houses were burned, and the temperatures had to have been high. I was watching these cars that, the wheels, the rims had been melted. You see the same exact things. Exactly. They look exactly the same as what you're seeing in Maui right now. But there were hundreds of them, hundreds of these cars. Many of them were parked on the side. And that's when I started realizing that there's got to be a high casualty count here. And then I started, talking to people, talking to sheriffs, and the sheriff was giving me some information. And it was clearly in the thousands, and he couldn't put his fingers on it. It was so big. And the sheriff had ordered up a couple of temporary morgues, military morgues that they would use in combat, ordered two of them up. in anticipation of the large numbers of casualties. And then all of a sudden, the numbers started coming in about 37 dead and 57 dead, and then finally figured out 70 some dead. And it was very, very slow and painful. And we realized that those numbers were completely off. I was talking to people that had been in the fire, that actually sheriff's auxiliary people and other people that were helping at the time were called out from other areas, and they were reporting hundreds of people that they saw were dead or that had died and perished in cars that were parked, and they're now dust. And so there was a couple cars that I had
Can't
seen
even imagine.
with the remains of people, and all you saw was part of the skull. Most of the bones and everything else were ash at the time. So those were kind of like the easy pickings. And the number of the dead people that came about in that particular fire, they listed as 87. Now, that meant that they could only find 87 bodies. Right. They had thousands.
So is that why the police chief and the governor made a statement that they would only be counting the number of the dead as far as the actual bodies that they can identify, because there are so many remains that can't be identified? I mean, even though we know they're lying about the bodies, the 183 bodies that were found on Lanai, a nearby island, washed up. We know that for a fact. Are there other neighboring islands where bodies washed up? I mean, I can't even imagine having a family member there. And what's today, the 30th? This happened on the 8th. This is 22 days ago, more than 3 weeks. And there are people that still don't know where their family members are because they've most likely been vaporized. I mean, the damage that you can see, if you just use your critical thinking skills and look at the damage, it doesn't look like a normal fire. It took really super hot temperatures to be able to do that. And that's why there are so many people that can't be found, that are unaccounted for. What is it now? 2025. I think that's just the number of missing children. It's got to be over 3,000 then for total missing people. Yeah, so let me finish letting him speak, because this is just the tip of the iceberg. Wait till you hear what he has to say about how the smart meters are involved in this.
They couldn't account for, and that was about 3,000 is what we figured, and it could have been as high as 5,000. We don't know for sure. I know that we did have an opportunity in the 28 days that we spent up there researching the fires and the high temperatures and everything else that were going on, that they had a mortuary group that was running around, 12 men in a van with white suits on, and they would search properties. And we did have a chance to talk to them, and they said, we can't find the remains of anybody. And people are calling in, my grandfather's missing, can you find him? They developed a list, and I saw the list, and I said, how many people do you think are here? He says, we have at least 3,000 that we can't account for. My goodness. So that's where we got that number. Okay. And we were stunned. My team was stunned. We had a couple of people from New California that had backgrounds in biologics and metallurgy and heat, and they were estimating the temperature at least 3,000 to 4,000 degrees. And of course, that's when we started to put two and two together, that with the aerosol spraying of the chemtrails, you have aluminum oxide. Aluminum oxide is a fire accelerant. I mean, it burns very fast at a very high temperature. But the other insidious thing about it is that
I mean, seriously, I'm 42. When I was a kid, chemtrails weren't a thing. You saw maybe a skywriter here or there once in a while, but you didn't have all these lines crisscrossing the skies like all day, every day. And whatever they're spraying in there, which is, excuse me, aluminum, barium, strontium, things like that, heavy metals and toxic heavy metals, all those particulates are falling down on the ground onto the cars and the plants and the trees and everything else that's ground level. And yeah, so crazy.
Starting to look at plants that have been growing in the ground, and the plants, the roots had burned in the ground. Now, if you've ever seen that look, it's a very different look. Here you have a forest and you have these trees, and you see sometimes oak trees, as an example, that be knocked over. And you say, well, that looks kind of strange. It's a perfectly good-looking, healthy oak tree, and it's knocked over and it isn't burned. But when you look down it and you look at there's a big hole, that's where the rootstock was. And the tree just tipped over because the rootstock had been burned inside the soil. And so that's when we said to ourselves, something really hot burned that. And it had to be 3,000 to 4,000 degrees. That's what was the conclusion of what people were saying. And so then we started doing some real thinking that, well, obviously, the aluminum oxide is bonding with iron in the soil. Well, of course, the soil is all red, just like in Maui, the soil is red. So it was combining with it. When it does that, it makes a compound called thermite. Right. And thermite will burn at 3,000 to 4,000 degrees, and that's how we got the high temperatures on those plants. The microwave,
which is interesting because I know there was thermite found in the testing, the private testing that was done on the site at 9/11. So interesting.
effect of the houses by way of the smart meter and by way of whatever signal they were giving off for microwaves was the trigger for the houses to burn at such a high temperature as well. And that's why all the homes turned to white ash. Everything was white ash. The walls collapsed in, the ceiling. There were, normally in a forest fire, and I've seen this many times in fires over my life, but when you have a house that burns, there's usually parts of the house that are remaining. You can see a wall or the roof or collapse in or something. But not in these fires. There's nothing, and you see that in Maui, same thing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the appearance from Paradise, the pictures I've seen, the after the tragedy or after the fires from Paradise look very similar to Maui or vice versa. I remember one case. I worked with one case of an automobile fire, and this was a hot fire. And there was a man that was insured for, I think it was $2.5 million inside in this vehicle. And it was the whole thing was strange. But the fact is, it didn't look anything like what I saw in Maui with the pictures from Maui or with the Paradise Fire. So yeah, so okay, so you're saying obviously that there's something here pretty foul going on.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And so we spent 28 days. We worked with we worked with the Epoch Times and some other agencies and reporting and that sort of thing. And they provided great services for us and stuff. And we reached some very interesting conclusions that we noticed that homes that didn't have their electricity on survived. Homes that had their electricity on with an analog meter survived. We're talking about an electric meter. And with the smart meters, if the power was off, they survived. If the power was on, it's obvious that the entrance into the house wiring system was through that smart meter, because all the smart meters literally had blown up. The wires had melted, and the house had been incinerated from the inside out. When you have a house that's incinerated from the inside out, the walls and everything collapse in. And you'll notice that in a lot of these fires, that you can have plastic tubs right outside next to the house, and they survive. Right, they survive, but you look at the house and it's gone. It's just all ash, white ash. That's the reason why, is that they use the wiring inside the house to incinerate it like a microwave. It gets to extremely high temperatures, around 3,000 degrees, and that's what causes the white ash.
My goodness. Okay, and I think would you say that like Paradise, Maui, multiple sources of ignition, whether it be start of the fires, whatever that might have been, along with the another point of origin would be by way of the smart meters. Perhaps something. I mean, multiple points, multiple modes of origin. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yeah, okay. But they're all manufactured. This isn't an arsonist walking around with a bag of, sparklers. Not at all. This is an airplane, or these are aircraft aloft that are shining beams down, and there's a lot of beams that were reported by people. That was one of the first things I heard about on my telephone call in the early morning. I wasn't even. I was getting ready for my show, just like you're getting ready for your show, and all of a sudden you're reading it with, I got to get out of my house. There's these beams, I'm like, what's that? Well, I learned later, because actually some of our local TV stations have reported some of them and showed a couple of them, and I said, oh, that's a direct energy weapon, and I was familiar with those from Raytheon and Grumman and those companies. They make them, and they've made them for the U.S. military, and they do have projects that have been going on. I understood that there were some projects that have been going on for a long time with that, and I said to myself, they're using these on Americans. So that was another hard conclusion. I had to kind of walk myself through it, but that was a conclusion that now we can kind of really understand. And what I think has happened in Maui, fast forward 5 years, there's a couple things. We were the only independent news group up there, citizen journalists. There were some that were starting to come around. D.E.W.s, as an example, did a fantastic job in her reportage of furthering where we had left off in a number of things. And one of the people that was there was contributing was a former fire captain who actually was part of New California at the time. He's since passed on, but he was very, very helpful in getting us to understand. I think that D.E.W.s and the other people to understand that these fires are really caused by outside agents, and it's not a natural fire. In fact, all of the fires in California, when we look back on it, were not natural. Many of them had been caused by the same types of sources. As we started to find out, we found out that really what Jerry Brown was doing was helping CAL FIRE and working in conjunction with CAL FIRE. And yes, I am accusing them as this. CAL FIRE, which by the way is now assigned to FEMA, and guess where they are? They're over there in Maui, spending $1,000 to $1,500 to $4,000 a night for a room in Maui to stay on FEMA's dime. Just to let you know. But CAL FIRE was very intimate and involved with Jerry Brown in starting these fires, and for capitalistic reasons, we called it disaster capitalism because the federal government will backfill and will actually pay a profit to these, what amounts to a profit to the state of billions of dollars. And of course, Jerry Brown needed those billions of dollars to keep the state solvent. And we quickly started to look into that one as a real reason for these crimes. One day alone, I was actually doing a follow-up coverage on the Oroville Dam. So I go up to the top of the tower of the Oroville Dam lookout area, and I'm ready to do my...
This part is also super important because it also goes to show that none of these fires are an accident, and it's impossible. It's statistically impossible for all these things to be coincidence.
I was talking to the report on what's going on for Agenda 21 Radio, and I look in the stick, and I said, my God, that looks like a plume of smoke. And I turned around, and a fire had started just within minutes. A fire had started. It was called what is known as the Chinese Wall of Fire, and it was one of 27 fires that started at the same time that day.
How did it even happen?
Wow.
Now, there's something wrong with that picture, isn't there?
Yeah. Please go on. I mean, okay.
This is the kind of... Well, it's the only way to explain it is that, they were trying to explain it that it was arsonists. Napa and Sonoma fires in particular, they were saying that those were arson. As we looked at it, It wasn't arson at all, because guess what? You had the same kind of homes looking like the same kind of thing as you had in all the other areas. Santa Maria was the same. They had a huge fire up there. Santa Rosa, excuse me. They had a huge fire up there. I was going to do a speaking engagement in Santa Rosa, and I was driving. I'm a biologist, so kind of let you know, botany is one of my big things. Genetics and virology and botany, I love it. But I was driving around and I noticed the desiccation of the trees. Trees desiccate when they get filled with compounds that are poisonous to them. And aluminum oxide is very detrimental to a tree. It causes, rather than a tree that's brilliantly green, deep green, to be sort of a greenish brown color. And it's a broad leaf, it kind of curls in on the leaves. So I was noticing in that area they have a lot of different types of plants, but most of them were desiccated. And so I pulled over at one point in time just to check out the plants. I'm doing like a doctor, which I'm checking out these plant leaves, and I'm saying these things are totally desiccated. I didn't realize how bad they had been chemtrailed. And so it was just a couple days after that they had their big fire, and I said, voila, here it is. Because the fire, once it got into the plant tissue, then it hit a flash point, and it would burn very, very hot, probably 3,000 degrees, 3 to 4,000 degrees. That's that high temperature we talk about.
Right.
So they're just torches waiting to go off at a very high temperature. Plus, you have buildings that are saturated with aluminum oxide. It makes like a soup, and pretty soon things are really getting out of control. Spontaneous explosions of cars and things like that because of the high heat. And you really saw some pretty good pictures at the time. You can go back and take a look at what was going on in Paradise. It was the same, but in Maui, there was some pretty graphic stuff that showed, excuse me, people driving in their cars, and the car inside of it is very, very hot. In fact, as people were telling me when they were driving it to escape it, if they touched the side of the door or the window, it would burn them, literally burn them.
Wow.
People couldn't put their feet on the floorboard because it was so hot. And they were very
Does that sound like a
fortunate to get
normal
money.
fire
People,
to
of course,
you?
didn't, but you saw some pretty graphic stuff going on in Maui, which is very emblematic of what is going on, what went on in Santa Rosa, what went on in Napa and Sonoma.
That reminds me of the one story of the local that said, I think it was on Eric West's channel, Hawaii Real Estate, where he went back to find, I believe it was his aunt and nephew, and maybe like great aunt and uncle, and they were all huddled up in their car, like in their driveway, like they were just trying to get out. And I think the heat, it must have been so hot. Wow.
All in the whole area, because there were people trapped in those cars too. The first time I heard about this, a fire captain who used to be with us, a different fire captain, had the radio on in the background, and I was asking him about the fire. It was the middle of the night, and I could hear them talking about in the background. The fireman, he was in the station, in the background, about these people in their car being incinerated in their cars. And I thought to myself, geez, these are Americans doing this to Americans. And that's what happened in Maui. But now we're finding out a little bit more, because it truly is, as I was saying, because I've been doing Agenda 21 radio now since 2010. This is a globalist adventure, basically, to get us out of different places on the planet, and to destroy us. And again, this is a property grab going on, so you can have your big 15-minute city or smart city in Maui. And it's pretty obvious that that's what's going on. And people like Oprah Winfrey support that. And what about Bezos? He comes in, I'm going to throw $100 million at this and help everybody out. Well, most of the people, we're looking at over 2,000 kids incinerated.
Yep. Where are the missing children?
A school superintendent. When they came out on Friday with their report for the Hawaii schools, and I knew exactly what they were doing. I knew I could have told. My number was at least 2,000 at the time for the kids, and they came out with 2,025 are missing.
Wow.
I mean, I knew what their numbers were. I could know the size of the schools, and I can project it. That was my business for a long time. And so here we are. Now Maui's missing 2,025 kids. And some people are making excuses. Well, the kids have gone to other places. No, they haven't. They haven't been able to track where the kids have gone. And what happens when a kid goes to another school, and the school that receives the kid puts in an immediate request for the records.
Right.
They haven't had any records requests received.
Wow.
That's called a clue.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's called a clue.
But it's difficult to get Americans to, most people to really pay attention to this and to understand the magnitude of what is taking place. Folks, my guest, and I'm so pleased to have him.
And yeah, I'm going to leave it off right there because he said it perfectly. Most people don't realize the magnitude of what is taking place in our country right now. When I say that this is a pivotal point in our country, I am not exaggerating. This is a pivotal point in our country. If we don't stand up for Lahaina and Maui and tell the people who are elected leaders, not the bureaucrats who get paid to do whatever they want to do, but our elected leaders, our supposed elected leaders, that we are not going to allow this to happen. And I don't think that the people, the Hawaiian natives, are going to allow it to happen either. I think that they are warriors, they are super strong, and that land is, they have a special ancestral tie to it. And I really think that the globalists picked the wrong people to do that to. But they don't care. They are completely heartless, completely evil, and yeah, they're going to do whatever they want. So I need to go get some sleep. I have not been sleeping well, so I'm sorry I look super tired tonight. But yeah, I just wanted to bring you guys this interview since the Hagmans got blocked on YouTube, and you can't go and listen to their stuff anymore unless you go to their website, or I believe they're still on the podcasts on Apple Podcasts, or whatever podcast platform that you use to be able to find podcasts. But yeah, so if you have a chance, you want to go finish listening to that interview, it is on hagmanpi.com. It is from August 28th. That was Paul Preston, who was an investigative reporter, an independent investigator reporter who happened to get in there with all the other affiliated, big Fox News, ABC, NBC, CNN. He was the only independent one who was actually allowed in there. I think he knew somebody because he lived in the area. But yeah, what he talks about in that interview, I mean, if that doesn't put it in perspective for you that this was not an accident, this is an absolute land grab. And we all need to continue to talk about this until we're blue in the face, because they're just going to keep sweeping it under the rug and hoping that people will let it go and that we're just not going to talk about it anymore because, it's on to the next thing. Like the hurricane that's going on right now with 17 or more gas stations that got diesel fuel in their regular gas tanks. What a coincidence. Just so everybody knows, there's no way that was an accident either. But yeah, have a good night, guys. I am going to try to get some videos in the next few days up relating more so to fentanyl, but this is such a pressing issue going on right now. It needs to be talked about. It needs to be discussed. And yeah, if we don't say something, we're going to lose this country. And these globalists with their Agenda 2030 are going to come in and take whatever property they want and build their 15-minute cities and lock you in like they do in China, and you won't be able to leave unless you want to go to the store, go to the park, and it's within a 15-minute range from where you live. So if that's the kind of life you want to live, then by all means, don't say anything. Just sit on your ass. So have a good night. Thanks for watching.